We are thrilled today to have Irina Rozovsky visiting us from all the way from Athens, Georgia. Is that correct? You are in Athens, Georgia. um, and to be joined again by my colleague, Lucy Gallun in the Department of Photography. This is our Seeing Through Photographs Study Center, where we take works of art of particular interest to the museum, and we hope to all of you, and we talk about them as if we could see them and hold them and be with them together. And today I would say we have a really exceptional possibility for experiencing these things physically in a way that's even, I would argue, maybe even better than in a gallery. So we'll see, or maybe even better in a study center where you wouldn't be able to touch them anyway. um, so maybe we'll begin, Lucy, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about seeing through, not seeing through photographs, that's my job. But if you tell us all about Companion Pieces, New Photography 2020, and how you came up with that idea, and how Irina, she was really one of the first artists that you spoke about being a part of it. So if you would talk to us about that, that would be great. And then we'll turn to Irina and let her speak in a little more detail about the work.
Sure, just briefly, thank you so much, Sarah, and it's really fun to be here and joining another of the great artists from Companion Pieces, New Photography 2020 in the study center. There are 8 artists that are in this iteration of New Photography. For those of you who have attended the other study centers, sorry for any repetition, but New Photography is a series here at MoMA that started in 1985, and it was yearly or every couple of years. And this year, due to the pandemic and a temporary closure at MoMA, of course, now we're back open for anyone that's able to come. New Photography exists online, and I'm sure that's something we'll talk about quite a bit here, because Irina's objects that are included in this project are so tactile. You would just want to hold them. And thinking about how they exist physically is, really interesting. The show includes 8 artists that range from huge hangings, montage, to series of photographs, to smaller objects. And all of the works in the show think about how images talk to one another, the relationships between images. And sometimes that comes about in a sequence, sometimes that comes about in layered images. And sometimes, we really think about maybe a diptych or 2 images that have a close connection or a correspondence. And yeah, when I first saw some of these works by Irina, I had seen some of her work. She was in a great show at our friends, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, organized by Mia Feynman. And that was a beautiful show, also about conversations in an interesting way. But this was very different work in some ways. And I saw a picture that of one of these frames, and it just so captured certain ideas about literally connecting or hinging through joinery to images. And then when I started to realize that Irina was making lots of these works, I was dumbfounded. And of course, I think we might have a chance to talk about how this fits in with other work that Irina makes, which are prints in series, and this is a really distinct project in some regards. So that's a brief intro to the context in this project, and let's hear from Irina.
And I should say, the closed captioning is now available, A, and that we are recording this, so B, that's all. 2 things I
Don't
forgot to
make
do.
mistakes.
Right, for the 3 of us, the high stakes, but it's okay, we can manage.
Right.
All right, sorry, please take it away, Irina.
Wow. Thank you so much. It's if someone had told me like a few years ago that I would be in this show at MoMA and be in that show while sitting at home, I don't think I would have believed it. But it's been like such an incredible journey doing this with you, Lucy. And from the very beginning, it's been so thrilling, and to be here with all these chats coming in from all these different places. You know, I think as hard as this period has been of being separated, I think that it's actually yielded some really beautiful connections. So thank you for having me. And shall I tell you about this work, this project?
Yes, yes, please do. That would be fantastic. And yes, great.
Let's go to the first slide. And this has not much to do with what I'm about to show you, but in another sense, it has everything to do. This is what you're seeing is a kind of clumsy photo that was tucked into my, negative sheets. And it's a photo that I wasn't thinking about as a photograph, but as this place itself. It's a little building that I stumbled on in Lynn, Massachusetts, where I used to live as a kid. And and I saw this, I mean, it's such a not glamorous picture. It's like the least miraculous photo of a miracle center, and it was closed and I didn't quite know what it was. But anyway, I tucked it in, and years later returned to this idea when I really felt like a miracle had happened in my life. I had had a kid, and it says my internet connection is unstable. You guys
I can hear
me?
you just fine. So if it's and just as soon as I said that, you froze up for a brief second, but I think it's all going to be good. We'll
Okay.
we'll say nice things to the internet deities.
So becoming a mother shifted my way of making pictures. Everything became kind of, first of all, I started photographing with a cell phone with an iPhone in a very serious way, because I had no, I was like rocking the stroller and then just photographing at the same time. And so everything became photographic in this kind of appendage sort of way. I was seeing everything, with the flick of a hand, and everything became quite small, because I think children make you focus on what's exactly in front of you. And so I started at the same time thinking what I would do with all these crazy amounts of iPhone pictures, photographing everything constantly, and not quite understanding how it could be formed. Had these, this enormous pool and sea of images, where it would end up, and it seemed like they could all disappear in the blink of an eye, if technology were to go up in flames. So some part of me wanted to make things physical. I was seeing my daughter hold things, and the attention that those little hands give to the microcosm right in front of their eyes. So I started somehow, and Lucy, I guess this is where it all came from, finding these little frames online, mostly because I wasn't going anywhere. And so these are what are called travel frames or pocket frames that before, now the phone is everything, and you can show anyone where you've been in a matter of seconds. But before that, as everybody remembers, things were physical and printed out. And as I started looking through this historic trove of the vehicle by which photography would be disseminated and held near and close, and the both symbolic framing of, photography is all about framing and putting a frame around the world, and then again actually making it physical in a frame. I started realizing that these frames that exist nobody wants them, nobody needs them, they have no purpose anymore, they're completely demoted. And so I started collecting them because I thought that they were beautiful objects, and many times they would arrive with you guys still there?
Yeah, that's good. We just moved in closer to see what you're showing us, because it's so great. So we just took down the slideshow for a minute. This way, yeah, no, it's good. This way we can see up close what you're showing us.
I'm showing you this picture, and it has, I bought it for the frame, but when it arrived, because they're selling it as a frame on eBay, and they're not quite really even talking about the images inside, but it's so beautiful with the Grandma Hughes and Aunt Iris. And so sometimes the frames would come with celebrities. I don't know who these people are. If anybody out there recognizes that, is that Ava Gardner? Who is that? Celebrities of the time, someone's missing. And then you're supposed to plug, your kids in there. And many times it seemed like the archiving and collecting of photography was a female responsibility because, you know, you have all these female texts like my grandchildren, my family, like the man's out there with the camera doing the heavy lifting and the woman's like quilting together these memories and patching them together. And then sometimes
I'm
we get
going to pause. There were two IDs. Rita Hayworth and Greta Garbo were identified by Seeing Through Photographs learners in that last one. So we are here to help you identify these people. If we get someone who's otherwise anonymous, then we're really going to be in luck. We'll see.
Anybody recognize these guys? I think these are like the standard. This boy is getting a lot of real estate. He's probably the favorite in the family, but these are kind of, they're not real pictures of real people. They're like the stand-ins for the real family. So I would get these and tear the old photos out. You know, it was very painful at first. It's like, who am I to do this, to lift people's memories out from these frames? But it's also very sad that they've been given up, that Aunt Iris has no home anymore. And anyway, I wanted to kind of give, without having to use old photographs, I wanted to use my pictures, but I wanted to kind of play with this idea of memories and tenderness. And I started putting in, this is the right orientation, putting in my own images that, you know, I had made on births that were also kind of homeless and had no place to go, and to kind of marry these two, the combination. So you see, I bought a number of these frames that open up like this. And so I try to collect similar frame, you know, if I see the same kind of frame, I try to buy it. And they're worthless. Like nobody really, they're not worth much as an objective item. What else? Oh, and sometimes they come with, you know, sometimes the frames are quite, like this is a silver one. And I can't get myself to, this is my absolute favorite, I can't get myself to remove some frames. I mean, some images, like I'll never take that horse out of its home, because the idea of someone framing a picture of their horse, to me is, you know, a world in and of itself. So I can't do any better than that. But I'll show you the cover of this one, and then we can go into the slideshow because they're much better represented that way. So this little frame here was one of the earlier ones, one of the earliest ones. And so I'm going to play with you guys in a minute, like just to, you know, you have this, you imagine it going places, like a travel frame, a pocket frame. It's so small. You put it in your purse, and it goes with you if you're going on a trip, or and so what do you expect to see when you open it? And then we can go to the slide. Oh, can I actually talk about the next one first, and then I'll talk about that one? So this is the inside of the frame that I just showed you. It's the inside, and it's you know, what I was saying about expectation is that it feels as if when you're holding this object that you're going to open it and see a face or a portrait. And to me, this is a kind of portrait too. You know, these are objects that belong to somebody that have been kind of misplaced, and together they sort of represent the person. These are my husband's shoes and glasses that are sometimes left around the house. And yeah, I mean, how can you have a narrative or a portrait of someone or a story about something with just two images side by side? And how can the cover or the way they're presented be part of the story? And then if we back up one slide, this was the first one that I ever made, and actually was photographed on this very table where I'm sitting. It's a ping pong table in our studio. And, you know, also part of this kind of idea of the miracle of photography, like I just started trying to make a kind of image that I'd never made before. It was like a chance to see in a way that I hadn't seen before. So I started photographing things in motion, you know, a way that photography lets us see that our eyes don't. And so those are just, you know, things in the everyday that I didn't have to go far to make these pictures. They were all made around the house. And this plate here with the orange underneath it, when I put these photos together, many times they don't work, and then something will just click, you know, it'll just be like this incredible opening for me. So the plate is translucent. It's this transparent, translucent blue plate, and the way it echoed with the frame, the translucence of the blue frame, it just, it touches a nerve that is hard to articulate, but it sort of works, and it keeps the pictures alive. So let's keep moving along.
I will say, Irina, I have to say one of the things you've pointed out that I find so compelling is, and Lucy has also mentioned this to me, that the hinging of the works isn't only the physical hinging of sort of the left and the right side or the sides and the center, but it's also the way in which the images and the frames are dependent on one another. That's another way of forming, or the horse and its frame. And so anyway, I find this so beautiful, and I love hearing you talk about how it's made. And I will say we had exactly the colors, as one learner said. Someone else observed that that in Egypt, apparently it's bad luck to leave an empty frame. And so that idea of how, just believing instinctively that something needs to remain together is pretty beautiful. So thank you. Keep going. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. There was also some more observations on the screen stars, but we'll get to that at the very end if we have time. I've taken notes to give you in case it ever matters to you.
Okay. No,
okay.
It does. Maybe, I don't remember what slide we had coming up, but
Be surprised.
Okay. So this was, maybe it makes sense to just go through them and let you guys know what I was thinking as they came along. This was, this frame that actually was, I believe, vertical, and it was made in Denmark. And there's this matching process. It's like these images are so virtual, and I fear this, like I was saying before, well of placeless pictures that I don't know what will end up with them. And how do you pin down a memory and like kind of hold it dear? Do you have to show somebody's face, or is it a moment? Or what about photography cuts into kind of the pulse and rhythm of our lives? And so this picture, it's me and my husband, and it's a reflection in the window, an antique store that's reflecting our image in this shiny frame, and it's a Tiffany and Company frame. And the way it fit into the oval, sort of like an eye or an aperture, that, the faces disappear, but it's sort of the idea of togetherness that photography in the vernacular sense is about. What's next? Some of the frames are broken. Some of the images are broken, or there's this, for me, like feeling of endurance, or that they've been through something, that they have a kind of story behind them, that they're not perfect, that time has rubbed off on them. That's something important for me. Yeah, that they've been through something, that there's they've been touched, or that they've been carried around. And so the image seems sort of upside down, and the top of the frame is cracked, and the missing part of the frame to me speaks just as much as the part of it that's together. And I should say, I grew up in the kind of antique world. My mom had an antique store, 2 antique stores. And so I spent a lot of time in these settings with old objects, and had to move things around in the store to help her juxtaposing objects. So the idea of taking something old and holding it in my hands has been really familiar to me. And how can I make it new, but still keep its story? What's next? So this was an interesting challenge, because when the show went, what's it called? Virtual? When it was no longer, how was I going to represent this? Because Lucy and I had been walking through the gallery and thinking how we could display the objects, and the idea of a pedestal, and then suddenly they had to be represented with one image. So imagine you have a virtual photograph. A photograph is kind of, surreal concept in the first place. What is it? It's just an image, and then it's printed out and put into a physical frame, and it becomes a physical object. And now I have to make a picture of that physical object and put it back on the screen, sort of, you know, back into this surreal, bottomless world. And if you guys want to see the physical one, maybe we can turn off the slide for a second. So this is how it looks. You know, walking around it, you could kind of see the optical illusion of it, and then.
So it's not actually even attached in there. It's such a treat to get to see you handle them. I have to say, I'm sorry that the show isn't happening physically, but that tactility is so amazing. And anyway, thank you.
It's been interesting, actually. This part of showing the frame in one image has been a very kind of fascinating challenge for me. How to show the frame,
and then right,
yeah.
and then the fourth step being how to share this, you know, sort of live conversation kind of, you know, where you're bringing it back from that still singular image into a kind of interactive, almost performative, you know, I took a picture of you when you were holding one sort of up on your forehead, and it's like, it's a whole other way of seeing, you know, another kind of connection to these. So thank you. Okay, I'll be quiet.
Is there another slide? Should we keep going on the slides? This one is, so this is a triptych, and it, you know, it's just photographed down the street from where I'm sitting right now. And I just like, you know, the triptychs are kind of such a loaded form in art history, you know, we're thinking about kind of religious painting, and I like marrying it with a kind of street photography, Google streetcar, as if this, you know, satellite image is driving by and like stretching the frame apart. And the idea of this woman stuck in the central cube, or, you know, panel, and like forever stuck there, but also feeling like she's about to walk into the one on the right hand side. What's next? Is there another one? This one was, I don't have it on me here, but it's I don't know what to say. It's just self-explanatory. You know, it's a kind of frozen lake, and in a frozen heart. You know, that's sort of how I see it.
It's so interesting when you say that, because I've spent a lot of time looking at this one. This was the one I posted this morning. And when you say it's so evident, you know what it is? It is not evident that it is a frozen lake and a frozen heart. I can read that. Lucy, I don't know what you thought when you saw this, but, you know, I see like the shadow of what seems to me, you know, it's like some sort of tree or something. And I couldn't read whether that black was like a void or a puncture, or so.
Or it looks a little bit like the surface of the moon.
Yeah.
With a lake. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I like that. It's interesting.
Someone offered. Yeah. So I feel as if actually, and maybe it's part of that sort of disjunction of scale. It's like, you know, if you're seeing something small, it isn't necessarily that, you know, the only thing you can believe in its scale is when your thumb is in it or something like that. But everything else is so untethered that I find with your work, my mind really races in places that aren't. I'm like, well, no, it couldn't be that, you know, and then you're like, well, maybe, I mean, even the first one you showed us of the oranges on your ping pong table, I had read that a number of different ways before without actually, you know, only today is it making more sense. So,
I mean, I guess I like knowing that, Sarah, because it's like it's pretty easy to photograph, you know. I mean, you just kind of point the camera, especially these days, anyone can photograph, and it's like for me, I'm so interested in the transformation that can happen, you know, that you can look at something obvious right in front of you, and it's physical and clear, and then something about the photograph or something about what I'm doing with putting them in this frame, this transformation can happen where it can, not in the classical surreal way, you know, look like something else. But I mean, the fact that you said it's a void is pretty much there, or the surface of the moon, you know, it doesn't have to be what it originally was, but the feeling is still there.
Yeah.
What's next? This is also just around the corner. And yes, this is just a shadow. And these frames are, I guess, like the first one that I showed you, you know, with the two objects, if you guys can see it in the reflection. And it's interesting, like the idea of, you know, this is probably a frame from the 30s, 1920s or 30s, and they're cheap, you know, they're cheap. And, you know, growing up in the antique context, it's really interesting to me what has value, like what remains to have, you know, if someone walks into an antique store, they're like, oh, but this is new, I don't want this, it's too new. But then if you walk into a new store and something's has been returned and is used, like, oh, but this is used, I don't want this, it's used. And like the idea of how old something is really interesting. And this was a very probably cheap frame, like that's glass that's made to look like emerald, like no one, you know, no, this is kind of like a poor man's luxury, like it's fake, you know, it's fake emeralds. But now it's very, because it's older, it has a different kind of caliber, or different weight. And I like the idea that there are two panels, like what, you know, the expectation of putting, is it two children or a husband and a wife? You know, it's like those pendant portraits, Lucy, that you were describing. And so, I don't know, I feel like this picture sort of shatters that with this fragmented shadow. And then, like, you know, this is a gutter, so kind of like the shadow going into the gutter, a little bit of green coming out. And yeah, it just, you know, the gold is sort of kind of baroque and like rich feeling, but it's a gutter and these like fake emeralds. For me, it kind of oscillates, and I'm not sure what it adds up to, but I like the kind of the high and the low notes.
If I could interrupt you for 1 second, you mentioned your growing up in the antique business thing, and I know what that refers to. I think you might not have mentioned that so much in your introduction yet so far, so maybe you could give people a little clue about that reference.
Well, so my mom was, how far back should I go? My mother was she's always liked history. And when we came from the Soviet Union, she was an engineer. And so she first started by going to flea markets, and I was always with her. And she started like kind of working her way up and buying more and more kind of refined stuff. And in the end, she was selling like European paintings and furniture and objects. And it was my job to arrange them in the windows and the cases. And I think that was my first kind of studio art experience, because I would realize that, you know, okay, I have these two objects. Do I put them side by side? I mean, the idea is to not just sell the stuff, but to create a composition. So if they're two of the same, does that mean shouldn't they be farther apart? Should they be angled? Should they be side by side? Should they be on separate shelves? And so the interaction between objects, I think, taught me how they can talk to each other. And I think that informed my, you know, when I started photography, I learned it from books by, you know, poring over photo books. And so the idea of turning pages and opening, and how picture follows a picture, you know, they also, as we all know, talk to each other. And so I think in this project, you know, it's a chance to kind of play with both physical stuff, play with the past and play with the present. And yeah, I don't know, Lucy, if that.
That's so interesting. Do you know, Irina, you're making me realize that when I was a teenager, I got a job in a store called Pinch Penny Pick a Pocket. And maybe this is like presaging what I would end up doing with my life. At the time, they tasked me with sort of organizing the little displays, because I loved placing the little knickknacks and sort of figuring out what worked and didn't. And I had this sort of instinctive loathing of symmetry that carries with me. So like, I can't ever put a pair of two things like that are identical right next to each other, you know, at home. in the
Yeah.
galleries at MoMA. So, but maybe it all comes down to sort of teenage, experience as a young child, thinking about how objects relate in a visual way in the world.
They
So
take up space.
yeah, interesting.
And also how to, yeah, there you go, Sarah. There's your early curatorial route.
My early in pinch penny pick a pocket, until we got, anyway, I won't get that. I will, can I also just, we've had some good questions come in, and I'd love, one of them is sort of as you have this up and while I've already interrupted you, uh, one of our learners named Tabitha, hi Tabitha, has asked it, first of all, a big fan of your work, like we all are. And of course, sorry not to see a physical exhibition in the gallery, although I would say in the moment we're in this, I'm kind of convinced that this has advantages that a physical exhibition wouldn't have. And one of which are these kinds of conversations. But Tabitha asks, is there an overarching concept that joins the photographs themselves together? Or are they chosen primarily on how they connect and amplify in the frames? The combination is distinctly powerful, and I agree. I also admire Irina's celebration of the frames, which could easily be dismissed as decorative or too female, and the celebration of the small, when so much photography on view strives to be taken seriously through its gigantic scale. And so she commends you for not relying on that crutch. And anyways, so would you speak a little bit to sort of your choice as a woman, the choices that you're making, and to this combination either between the images or a little more to the images in the frame?
Thank you, Tabitha. These are really good questions. Well, I mean, I do feel, I like traditionally as a photographer, I was running around. I'm not a war photographer by any means, but I have a kind of history of going places, getting lost, like renting a car and just being outside of my natural habitat. Like I'm not a home photographer. And since life changed, I pretty much make all my pictures, all my pieces right where I'm sitting, right, talking to you guys right now. And I really began to feel like, wow, this is like woman's work, And also these frames, like I showed you before, like we can all agree, despite kind of gender, questions or society questioning gender roles and stuff like that, that this is my grandchildren. Like we expect what our vision of like a 1950s person would be this is the grandmother's thing. So I was like, wow, but how can I upend that, and how can these little pieces feel, I don't know, not dangerous, but feel dark and not necessarily precious and not necessarily feminine. I mean, I know that there's a lot of images of women or, female forms, like this is clearly a female form, but it's my hope that the pictures, there's a slight disturbing element in the way the photos are cut.
This is also alien, I would say, by the distance for the neck. That's not a human shape, even if so I think, there is something ominous, at least.
But I like that. I like that.
Yeah, I do too.
It could seem at first glance that it could be dismissed. I don't mind that. I think I don't have anything against the large images, like a Gursky on a wall is like, you can't argue with that. But can I do that with a small piece? Can I do that with something that sits in your hand? Because for me, it's the history of like photography as what photography means to people who aren't artists is really important. The way my grandfather photographed the family and then developed the pictures in the darkroom is just as much an inspiration for me as, I don't know, anyone that I've seen in galleries or museums. Maybe there's some more images that we can talk about that in the slideshow.
That's great. Let's keep going. Yep.
Yeah. So I don't know, we're thinking about Tabitha's question. Like this is a frame that is really popular. Like if anyone goes on eBay, you could probably find some of this like a $15 frame. And for some reason, I haven't really found them with images. They come new. I don't know. They must have been really mass produced. I'd say this is like a 1960s. I have it here. I can show you guys the physical version of it, but I have them in every color. Take your pick. so that, but in terms of what I photograph, I mean, this one's a little bit different because it's a person I don't know and it's in a public place. You know, this is a picture that I took in New York when I was living in New York. And yeah, so I think that each piece stands alone in and of itself, you know, like I see them as books, and this is a particular book one, you know, in the space between the man and the chair is sort of the book that you've already read, but you don't need to see it. So there's sort of like the bookends, but so it stands by itself, and it doesn't necessarily relate to the picture before it, but I imagine that they're all sort of part of this library or collection, you know, that they're all like, this is its own piece and it's not directly related to the previous one, but they're in the same extended family. But I don't believe in like serious rules of what can or can't be photographed. Like somehow this felt right to me. He's sitting there on the subway and he's got flowers and he's sleeping, and then the chair on the right is off kilter. So there's this kind of sense of, you know, not being firmly comfortable. Yeah.
Can I interject with a question? You talked a little bit about not having serious rules, and I wondered if having this project alongside some of the work you described that you had been doing, you know, going off and shooting some maybe an assignment somewhere, or working on a series of photographs in a particular place and imagining them as prints, whether having this project allowed some kind of possibility that you didn't necessarily have in the other way you were working in series or an assignment, that maybe sometimes a picture that you already had could fit in a new kind of way of working.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, I'm really interested in repurposing photos from the past that I've made and seeing them in different contexts. So, you know, I see it sort of as this all one big pool, you know, of images, and they are. Lucy, do you mean whether I would use previous photos for this?
Well, that could be one way, or also just the sense that, you know, an artist or a photographer works in a certain way on commission or making a series, and then to have this other way of envisioning photographs and another way of imagining how they work together, like could provide an opportunity maybe.
Yeah, for sure.
Actually, sorry, Irina, sorry, before you answer that, while you're interrupted, before you get going, there are some other questions coming in about, you know, what the relationship, so about the correspondence between the frame and the photos and the combination of them. And so, you know, how separate are these, or were they, you know, were the photographs taken without a specific frame in mind? How difficult is it to match them up? And then someone else asked, are any of the, yeah, exactly similar, are any of these ones that you had created prior to having the frame and so matched with the frames? Or, you know, do you ever get a frame and then think, I want to make a picture for that frame?
Yeah, it's such a, and maybe Lucy can answer that and then round back. Let's see the next one, and then just so our eyes don't get tired. Like this is a good example, for instance, that I can use to answer every question. So this is next to the post office here in Athens. There's this building that I find really interesting. Every time I go, I want to photograph it. There's those wells near the doors. Like what a strange architecture, you know. It's like a door, and then there's the, what do you call that? Like a this thing, you know, where the door is, and then there's that overhang inside the building, like a pocket, and a lot of homeless people sleep there and leave their stuff and like food stuff, you know, sleeping bags and food. And so I'm there by chance, and I photographed this place and someone's foot sticking out, and it's just, sometimes there are no people there. So I don't go there to photograph, but I'm going to the post office. And then this man walked by. In the second frame, you see him. I don't know if it's possible to zoom in, but and he saw me photograph him, and then he walks on, and then the next, like a month or two later, I go by and I'm doing the same thing and he's doing the same thing, and so I see him in the same place and I'm photographing, and I'm like, oh hey, and then I talk to him. I was like, oh, I have a picture of you and blah blah blah, and like, isn't it interesting that here you are walking and then here you are walking in this third frame, it's the same guy in the same place. It's just, to me, that's a miracle, that we can intersect like that. I know you guys know 42nd and Vanderbilt, that book where he sees the same Peter Funch, I think, where he sees the same people with years apart in New York in the same intersection. I mean, okay, this is Athens, the chances are higher, but there you are, like, we have nothing in common, but we intersect in this way, and I can photograph him with time apart in the same place. I'm not thinking about frames, I'm just responding. Like, for me, photography is a response to where and what I'm doing, where I am and what I see. And I, this is like totally in an impersonal space, and suddenly this like kind of serendipitous encounter happens. And so I'm like, how can I represent that? And I was thinking maybe in like, the book form of these tiny little frames that fold out. And so this was a frame that allowed me to blend those moments together. And it's hard to see because it's small, but it's basically these two, like, he's walking sequentially, but when you look at it closer, you're clearly recognizing that it's different days. So I hope that answers it. And it's, in terms of the picture, I'm taking pictures and then finding a frame that they fit into. I don't really ever get a frame or make a picture with a frame in mind. And then there's a kind of painful and a thrilling like experimentation process where I try one frame and it doesn't work, and then I try another one, and then I'm messing around with the order of things, the sequence of things. And then, Lucy, this is a sort of, for me, like a travel log, I mean, it's just down the street, but there's this feeling that I used to get when I would be in a foreign country. Yeah.
Today's travel.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny to me because these are travel frames, that's how they're termed, and it's through them that I'm like, trying to travel. They're not going anywhere anymore. They've had their travels, but looking at them kind of gives me the sense of escape. What's the next one? There's this one. This lady that I met at a Vietnamese restaurant. And I don't know, like, if I had all the money in the world, I think I'd still be buying the cheaper frames. Like, there's something in this more accessible, like, it's beautiful to me because it's I don't need it to be like encrusted with diamonds. And trust me, you can find that, you can find any like spectrum of fancy frame, or I just like that it's sort of clunky, like it's not fine detail and it's not 24 karat gold. It's sort of like tin that's painted yellow, and it kind of resonates with like the beauty of the image, but also the fact that the setting is a little bit, it's not super high class, but it's still really beautiful the way the light is on her, and she's sort of like this strip mall, middle of nowhere. I think this was in Tennessee. Like, I don't know, she's got this kind of holy glow on her. And I thought that was sort of nice with the way the gold around the frame is, it has almost like a religious quality.
Speaking of that holy glow and the type of figure that she is, a couple people have mentioned different art historical references in different ways. And actually, I realized, you spoke to me in this conversation about pendant, which is an idea that was really, integral for me in thinking about this show. And it is an art historical term, this pendant pictures that might have often been like a husband and wife picture that were two separate works of art but had a relationship, or it could have also been, seasonal pictures, the harvest season and then the cold winter, or music painting and art painting or something like that. But even without that reference to a particular moment in art history and maybe an exact influence from some of those pairings, just this idea of like imagining a pendant to one thing from another, and the way that there's this sense of one thing like hanging from another was something that I just really felt some of your work spoke to in different ways, you know, not just the ones that were literally joined by a hinge, although that was quite clear, but also, like Sarah mentioned, this connection between a frame and the image in it, or multiple iterations of something within an image. So I just wanted to make sure learners heard the longer story of that phrase, and also it might be an opportunity to speak to some of the other art historical references if you'd like to, or if they seem particularly relevant here.
You mean where they sort of come from in my mind, like what I'm thinking about?
Well, one person in the chat just mentioned surrealism as seeming like that was something that was of interest. And then I saw, you know, someone else answered about inspiration in art history, seeing particular, you know, ideas of quotations or other things, and if that was something that was of interest.
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course. I mean, I think it all bounces around in there. You know, I don't think I'm definitely working with the past. It's hard to pin down like particular, I think religious painting, Renaissance painting, you know, the triptychs. I think they're just, even Giotto, you know, they're just incredible, like extraordinary, wild moves, you know, or Bruegel. I don't know. I mean, there's so much in there, you know, just as much as Magritte. You know, there's so much that's rubbing off, you know, kind of making friction. You know, how do I look at something contemporary but give it this sense of like it's, I don't know, placeless or timeless?
And actually, you know, just seeing the surrealism comment reminded me, Irina talked about how we were walking around and sort of looking at cases in the museum, imagining how her objects might exist in a display scenario, which they're not existing in this show, but they're existing in other ways now. But we did look at some of the cases in the Surrealist Gallery, actually, you know, looking at the Merritt Oppenheim teacup and this thing that you want to touch, but that's under glass. And that was something that spoke to us, I think, when we were imagining what kind of case or how these objects might sit in a case together. And of course, you know, you can imagine them clustered together on like your mantelpiece or your end table. So it's not as if they would have never existed sitting on a case. You don't always touch them. You're looking at them sometimes, but yeah, that's just an anecdote.
And actually, if I could just add on to what Lucy's saying, is that someone asked, is each of these to be thought of as one? Well, actually, let's say, are these objects meant to be handled? So what's lost if they aren't physically touched? Because in some ways, what's, you know, you start with your image that's on your iPhone that exists in the ether, and then you have this very physical frame that you then pair and think about physically, and physically for display, but maybe physically even. So what do you think about what might be lost if they aren't physically touched? Because actually today has been, you know, and also I should say the magazine piece too gives you a feel for them as objects.
I just want to show everybody what's happening here. It's our train going by.
Okay.
No, I think whoever just said that, I mean, that's the core of it for me, how to make the virtual physical and lasting, you know, because I really do fear that all our efforts can just, you know, that cloud, that's not a joke, that's just, it's nothingness, you know, and that all our conversations, you know, like the letters, you know, the physicality of the previous world, like that remains, but how is all of our civilization going to be recorded? You know, it just seems like it's some sort of mirage. So I think that that's part of the impetus of doing this for me, is like that it's something to be held. And I think I forgot the first part, Sarah, of what you were just
He
asked.
was saying, are they meant to be handled?
They're meant to be handled. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what they're meant to do. I'm making them because I need to make them. And Lucy gave me a good reason to continue making them. And I mean, I handle them and I know they're right when I can hold it and open it. And, you know, just in the same way, like I'm now just finished working on a book of photographs that I've been making for a number of years. And I could do it on the computer, and I did do it on the computer as well, but I have to turn the pages to know if it's right. And I just have to, like, I have to do this. And I think it's this, you know, just watching my daughter grow up and relate to books, I think there must be some biological intrinsic like feedback loop that when you hold something like, you know, in front of your eyes, looking down like this, something must be triggered. And so I mean, I would like for them to be held, but I don't know in an exhibit if that's possible. But, you know, for me, I think something is lost if they're not held, but um, something else is gained when they're, you know, not. I don't know. I hold them, so I'm not losing anything.
Certainly something gained when you can share them with people, whether it, you know, when like we can experience it either physically in the gallery or virtually through letting us see you
Yes.
hold them.
But, you know, some of them are meant to be displayed. You know, like the ones that open are like this one. You know, this is a funny one. Like this is yet to be.
Go off to the slides so we can see a little
Oh
bit
yeah,
more.
I think this is the last slide anyway, so we can go to, yeah.
I think there's one more time, but I can show that
Oh,
one physically.
okay.
But like this one, you know, it depends on it depends on the thing. Like this is
I'm pretty sure I had a Holly Hobby album that was like that when I was little and I carried around with me.
but it's you know, you have to hold it. You want to hold it. It's meant to be held. But then there are others, and that could be, you know, if you want to do the last one, like this one I just got and I'm so excited about it. It's like this tiny
Oh,
little,
beautiful.
it should go on the front of a car, or guys, it could be a little mirror. But
Yeah.
Chris, would you bring up the last slide? Because we are getting toward the end of time. And I also want to read, I even just want to read some of the questions that people have asked, not to think that you could answer all of them, but just so that you can understand the degree to which you've inspired so many people who are watching today. So, but let's talk about this first.
well, this one, for instance, like I don't think it was meant to be held. I think this is from the late 1800s, and it's sort of like meant as a paperweight. And it's heavy. It's so heavy. I'm holding it. They don't make stuff like this anymore. You know, the glass is amazing. This piece of glass, I can show it to you physically, but I don't think you're supposed to really pick it up. It's just supposed to sit there. So I think it depends on the.
So this is on a little metal stand that we're looking at it right now.
I can show it to you physically.
Oh my gosh, it's so big.
It's big. Yeah. It's almost like a telephone, you know, those telephone pole pieces, but it just stands. It just stands, and it's sort of like has this magnifying property, but yeah, so I don't think it helps to pick. I mean, you can kind of move your way around it, but I mean, look at this glass. Like where do you see that anymore? And it's just floating around. It's just junk now, you know? It's like, look at that glass. I mean, that's an amazing amount of glass. That's just
It is amazing. So unfortunately, we're drawing toward the end of the time. I just want to share with you and let everyone hear for one another, like this has been incredibly inspiring. And I can tell, first of all, the activity on the chats and the questions has been amazing. So one asked, how many of these gorgeous frames have you made? So this is like a lightning round. How many of these gorgeous frames have you made? The challenge would be, when do you stop? Every frame sparks the artistic thought.
Oh, thank you so much. I don't know how many I've made. I've made some that don't work at all, some that are in progress, or I don't know. Lucy, I sent you a bunch, but maybe there's, I don't know.
Yeah, sometimes you change them up.
All right, well, so I guess the main message of that is then don't stop. So someone else wrote, at first sight, people wouldn't really appreciate the thought process behind these pictures and frames. People would expect to see a picture of someone. So it's changing the whole concept of these small frames, and I would argue how they function. So how did you arrive at the idea to put pictures that are not necessarily a portrait or a family picture, but a feeling, a serendipitous encounter?
That's so beautiful.
I know it really is. I'm going to read you a few more though, and then you can pick which questions you want to end with answering. Someone else asked, do you think of photography as a form of collecting? Which I think is also a really interesting question. And then someone else wrote, I think the frames show the scars of life lived. Irina's work has so much depth. The images and the convenience objects belong together.
Who are these people?
I know, you're really inspiring people. Hold on, I'm going on. Someone else talked about your inspiration in our history that Lucy did some justice to. We also, okay. Oh, do you consider your framed works as narrative vignettes? Would you, and then would you consider multiple works a longer running story? Anyway, you have, there are even more, and there are more comments in the chat, but you've really, so I'll just summarize you can pick from the last three. Photography is a form of collecting. The serendipitous, a feeling or a serendipitous encounter, or the scars of life lived.
Wow.
I know, they're all amazing.
Thank you. This is such a
thank you.
The highlight of 2020 here. But maybe what I'll tell this anecdote that I told Lucy, and maybe that will, I don't know, sort of help answer all those questions sort of in some way. But I was with my mom, we were at a antique flea market in Berlin, like, I don't know, 10 years ago. And I was really like kind of dumbfounded by this guy. He was selling old photos, and he had a box of old photo albums, sort of like this. I still have them somewhere. I should actually take them out. And they were the pictures, photo albums, from what I understood that I was looking at, of photographs made by Nazi soldiers in just hanging around, like, you know, they're not of battle, they're just there from their own cameras. And at first I was like, oh my God, these are Nazis. And then I thought, but they're just guys. They're like 19-year-old guys or 18, however old they are, and they're just screwing around. They're drinking beer, having a good time, or trying to survive, you know, and or whatever they were doing. And then some of the albums, they just had the pictures tucked into them. And something happened, the wind blew and the box fell, and all the pictures, all the albums scattered around. And the guy whose booth it was came up, and he started picking them up and like stuffing them into random albums. And I had thought, here's so-and-so's life, you know, that's his document, here's his document. And then when he did that, I realized how random they all were, and how like naive, or how much I wanted to read a story, you know, and how I was trying to put myself into their shoes and have understanding for who they were. And even though, you know, history wants me to think one thing, but they were just people. And anyway, yeah, so that's a collection, but it's also like the story made by the photos is different than the story that we end up reading. But I definitely think photography is a collective instinct that you just want to kind of put a net, you know, and draw it close, whatever you're looking at, like just kind of. Yeah.
Wow, I'm glad I gave you a choice on how to end it. Thank you. This really has been so inspiring. And Lucy, thank you for your partnership throughout this fall, bringing all of these amazing artists into our orbit.
I'm so glad they could be part of Seeing Through Photographs.
Yes, and Irina, it was amazing to see you talk about and interact with your work. So our own little Miracle Center Study Center. And thank you all. Thank you to all the Seeing Through Photographs learners for tuning in. You know, life is both as strange as ever and somehow returning to normal or not. And so it means a lot that you carve out the time to be with us. So thank you all. And also, thank you behind the scenes to the AV team, to the education team. You can't see them, but none of this would happen without them. So very, very grateful for all of their support. So
Thank you for amazing comments and questions. That's means a lot to me.
I think we're able to actually save them for you so you can, lie in bed at night and just sort of read how you inspired people. It seems worthwhile. So thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.